All right, so I want to start talking about in-game programming, specifically drag and drop. There's a lot of different functionalities out there, but very few systems for actually doing it live inside of a game as assets that you can produce or just pull in to use. I will show at least one for Unity, and I'm certainly going to demonstrate or show several of them that are used just for programming the games behind the scenes, something the designer or programmer might use if they're using a visual system. And I'm going to want to pose a lot of questions to this. So here's some things to think about. What do you think? I want to know what you think. How should it work? How should in-game programming work? What kind of limitations should there be? What genres of games might there be a great application for this? Because quite honestly, I could imagine almost anything, especially when you start talking about giving commands and instructions to other units or other characters or other objects inside of the game. For instance, you're a mechanic, so you tie in the idea of turning a key to opening a door. And those two things get tied together and you can use code to do it. What does this change in the sense of a visual nature? Are there things about programming that we take for granted because we do this linear approach to text? One line and then the next line and then the next line. There are so many potential ways that we could restructure the nature of programming to make it far more visual, far more interactive, easy to debug. There's this ongoing list. We could even take into account the fact that we're operating it potentially inside of a 3D world. The list is endless. But also, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What kind of systems have you run into? What kind of problems do you foresee with this? What challenges? What needs to be figured out? And then don't worry about whatever you post. I mean, we can have diametrically opposed ideas. This is brainstorming right now. Video 1 is brainstorming. Throw the most wildest, creative, crazy ideas out there. Even if you don't have any idea how to make it work, throw the ideas out there and let's see if we can. All right, so I want to introduce a couple concepts in here. I've got MIT Scratch, I've got GameMaker 2, Blocks Engine, and Unreal Blueprints. So MIT Scratch, in my opinion, is, to the best of my knowledge, this is one of the first ones that came out that generally made drag and drop programming available for children. So very young kids could get involved in programming and making their own video games by simply dragging and dropping these features. So that could include things like you press the left arrow key. So now your character turns to face left. That's a command. Point in the direction of -90 when you press the left arrow. And then move 10 steps and then next costume, whatever that is, I don't know. Change character names maybe? Anyway, this one has, you just drag these items. You have a list of things like here's motion, here's data that you can grab a hold of, here's events. So an event might be something like when a flag is clicked or when the left arrow key is pressed. And then you create, and just by dragging these elements onto it and then manipulating tiny pieces of it. So if there's an enumerator, you can drag it down. This one is great. Now it has a limitation. The MIT Scratch system has a strong limitation where you're not really getting into full coding, you're getting into instruction sets where you follow a linear path of instructions. And it's only tied to particular events. This does not, unless they've changed it, have any concept of functions or classes. So a lot of programming capabilities are gone, but we don't need our stuff to follow classes or functions either. There might be different ways of looking at this, of changing how code works. And to tie it into a video game of all sorts of different structures, I feel like there's a lot of potential here. Okay, so let's talk about GameMaker 2. I brought in GameMaker 2 because similarly to Unreal Blueprints and Playmaker from Unity, it's very node-based. It's this system where you can just drag and drop these features. But I like one particular thing about it that I'm not necessarily sure how well it plays out because I haven't used it. But they put visual icons for almost everything. It doesn't necessarily mean that the icons are perfectly going to make sense, that really is going to help it. Some of them will. A loop, let's see, a loop inside of this. Oh, did the user click down a mouse button? Did they release a mouse button? Those are particular events in here that stand out. They make a lot of sense. So I like those. Those ones work out really well, but there's a lot of coding concepts that are very cerebral and not so much visual. So I'd be curious about, I'm sure there are lots of icons in here where it's like, what's the difference between this gray icon here and this green icon here? Both of them appear to be splitting things. This one appears to be splitting a process. This one seems to be distributing data, maybe, if you consider typical notation that you might find of the diagonal boxes or diamond shape being a process and the square being a structure or data. Anyway, so there's a lot of stuff we could take into account there. Now, this has nice lines and systems for it too. And of course, you can click to change enumerator values and all sorts of different features in there. But like MIT Scratch, this one is also behind the scenes. It doesn't show up in gameplay. It's not for the players. This one changes that. This one is available on the Unity Asset Store. It's called Blocks Engine. And specifically, there's also Blocks Engine 2 out right now, which is what I believe this graphics is actually pulled from. Now, I purchased Blocks Engine 1 and I talked with the developer about it, and there were a lot of different things. There were certain issues with Blocks Engine 1 that I didn't really like the limitations on. And from the discussions with the developer, it does sound like they were planning to fix them, and to the best of my knowledge, it is resolved in Blocks Engine 2, where they, to the best of my knowledge, they also recreated it from the ground up. Okay. So, let's see. This one is really nice because it is, from the beginning, user-facing. It is specifically designed to face the player so the player can come into the game and manipulate things. I don't know exactly what, so there's all sorts of things. When this is clicked, when something else is clicked, this still seems to be following very specific event structure like MIT, and that seems to be the key focus of what it develops against. And certainly it's easier when you keep those limitations in play. But let's go into one more. Unreal Blueprints. Unreal Blueprints, I particularly like Unreal Blueprints. Similar to, I believe Playmaker does this too, or whatever the current Unity visual drag and drop programming system is. I'm not too current with that one just because of the fact that I don't typically ever work with the visual stuff. I just write code from scratch. But since I want this to be user-facing, I'm doing a lot more considerations on it. But in this one, they've got functions. They've got classes. They've got different types of things. And you can use things in a lot of similar fashion as you might use C++. Now, I don't know the limitations on where it works, where it goes, because my C++ and specifically Unreal knowledge is a little bit limited. I've done some things, but not a lot. And I haven't used Blueprints, but I've certainly heard plenty about it. Now, the fact that it does support classes and functions, that's functionality I want to pull into basically MIT Scratch. I want to give those features. But there's also complexities about those as well, like how you actually structure and create them. I mean, I remember the first time using like Visual Basic 3, and I was introduced in the basic language. I was already doing basic before then, and they had a wizard for creating functions because I didn't really know how to do them, and I was self-taught. So I used the wizard, and it had options for adding properties or parameters to it. And that was really confusing trying to understand. It makes perfect sense if you're already a programmer and know how to create these and what these different parts of the function are. But to a beginner who hasn't worked with them, it doesn't make much sense. So there's considerations on this as well as to how do we design things. So again, I go back to questions. I mean, I want to throw out almost everything I believe in programming. Like maybe we don't even need the concept of loops. Maybe it's something else. I mean, we can also draw from, I was going to say procedural, quantum programming, where basically data exists in all states at once, and then, or the functionality exists in all states of functionality at the same time, and then you push the data into it, and everything manipulates itself pretty much simultaneously. And there's all sorts of concepts we can pull in from that as well to reconsider. I mean, we can virtualize a lot of this system. But what should it be? How can we change the face of programming to make it easy, drag, drop, and still highly capable? Well, I'm hoping that you're going to put in some ideas here, and I'm hoping this is going to be a great video series. But I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thanks.